You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Today we had two games. We had the 76ers and Boston Celtics, and of course the Cavs and the Raptors. But we're going to start with the 76ers and Celtics. And it goes without saying that this might have been the biggest game or the most pressure on a 76ers team since maybe the 2002 series against the Celtics in the first round. But Philly came out very flat to start their game, and it's obvious to me that since they had that big lead in the first half of game 2, their offense is completely stalled. And they only had 8 points or 3.5 to go in the first quarter to give you an indication of how badly they are playing on the offensive end. And I don't want to hear excuses for their youth, because Boston is relying on Tatum and Rozier, both of whom are rookies, and they're getting the job done. Now, as soon as McConnell came in for Simmons, the pace and energy for the 76ers picked up significantly. Philly went on a 12-2 run with McConnell to take a 20-19 lead after one. Need I say more? This was a very physical and was a throwback game to the 90s and 80s wars that we saw between these two franchises. But then when Simmons returned, Boston went on another run, but this time Philly responded with Simmons on the floor, and after some big threes by Redick, Saric, and a huge dunk from Embiid on Baines, which resulted in a three-point play, the 76ers took a lead. And that run had plenty of emotion. It brought the crowd back to life, and the 76ers were playing with some confidence for the first time since that lead in Game 2. So it looked, from my perspective at least, it looked like Philly was ready to blow this game wide open. And I've questioned Boston's ability to play on the road at this year's playoffs, but they showed so much poise in the second half after that run. Ben Simmons, on the other hand, he did not play with any kind of poise whatsoever. His missed dunk is what people will talk about, but his entire game was off. It looked like he was crumbling under the Celtics' pressure. Even fundamental plays, like setting off-the-ball screens, he was struggling with. And that turnover by Redick towards the end of regulation, you know, the one where I think it was Rozier that picked it off, and it led to the Brown layup, that turnover was actually caused by Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons, if you watch the play again, you'll see Simmons attempt to screen away for Embiid, but stumbled into him, and Embiid also fell. Redick did make the mistake of passing early, but he was expecting Embiid to, get the screen from Simmons and be ready to catch the ball upon planting. Of course, Embiid stumbled and the ball just trickled, halfway across the court. Rozier picked it up, and it led to a breakaway laid up for Brown. Bellinelli responded with a game-tying buzzer beater. That's a mouthful. That was close to a three. People will make a big deal about the confetti falling. And if you didn't watch the game, what happened was the officials in the arena probably thought it was a 3. Therefore, they thought it was a game-winning 3 as opposed to a game-tying 2. And they dropped confetti from the ceiling. Now, once again, no excuses because, of course, they had to clean this up. So there was like a 5-minute wait, right? So I don't want to hear any excuses for Philly saying, oh, they took us out of our rhythm or whatever. Because both teams had to put up with this. If anything, it was probably tougher psychologically on Boston having to sit there and wait for the confetti to be cleaned up, knowing that you've just given up potentially a golden opportunity to finally get your first playoff win on the road in this year's playoffs. Now, Philly did get off to a good start in overtime, but they did fall apart. Al Horford played huge on both ends of the floor. And quite honestly, we're all guilty of giving Tatum, Brown, Rozier, Stevens, all those guys credit, but we often overlook Al Horford. And he is playing the best basketball of his life. If you just look at his stats, you won't be impressed. But if you actually watch the games, you'll see how good he is playing defensively. He's setting screens. He's doing all the little things that teams that have championship aspirations, they need in order to get to that next level. And of course, as I mentioned before, there'll be lots of talk about how bad Simmons is playing. And with that, you'll get overreaction as well, saying, oh, he's not very good, he was just hype or whatever. Look, he'll be fine. This is a learning experience. It's a painful learning experience. And all the greats go through it. But at the end of the day, when they go through it, they come out stronger and better players on the other end. Do you think Michael Jordan would have run off 6 straight titles had he not had to go through the bad boy Pistons? I don't think so. I don't think he would have had that mental toughness to go into Utah or to go into Phoenix and deliver the way that he delivered. The same with LeBron. If he didn't have to go through the Celtics, would he have been a strong, mentally tough player as what he is now? Probably not. You can throw the Spurs in there as well. They really tested him. Magic Johnson with Boston is another good example. So whilst you'll see in the upcoming days a lot of backlash towards Ben Simmons with hot takes or whatever, just keep in mind that pretty much every great player has gone through this. Kobe in Utah, I forgot all about that as well. So Kobe, remember the 4 air balls in Utah, and then he got swept the next year by Utah, got swept the next year by San Antonio. As I said, we've seen this with great players before. He'll be fine. Now, as for the series, yep, it's over. Philly might be able to grab Game 4, but can we see Boston losing 2 games at home in a row? Although there'll be a game in between, obviously. They would have had to lose 4 straight, and they're just too well coached to give that up. And normally, I'd be disappointed in a series that's 3-0, but not this time. I love what I'm seeing here, and I could live with these 2 teams facing each other for the next 10 years. And the scary thing is, beyond just player development, these teams will get better. So think about Boston, for example. They're going to get Kyrie Irving back. They've got a decent pick coming up, which could be the Lakers pick, which will more than likely be a top 10 pick. Now they could trade that and bring in somebody else or whoever, but they will get better. And the same applies for Philly. This is only really the first year of seeing what they've got. They will be able to mold around this team or this core group that they have. It will get better in addition to Embiid and Simmons and Brown and Tatum and Rozier and all these guys naturally developing. So I'm looking forward to that rivalry. I hope they don't implode. I had a question in yesterday's podcast asking if I could see Embiid and Simmons imploding like Shaq and Kobe. Now let's hope that doesn't happen. Let's hope that both these teams continue to develop. I think they will. I hope they will. I'm optimistic about it. And I hope we get a great rivalry out of it. Let's now move on to the Cavs and Raptors. And the Raptors benched Ibaka. I didn't expect Ibaka to be benched. And the energy was there for Toronto early on, but definitely not the execution. And they only had 4 points in the first 7 minutes. I kid you not, they really did. Toronto did start to get it going in the second quarter behind CJ Miles, and they trimmed the lead to 2 on a couple of occasions. The most memorable play, though, was an and one for Ibaka in a pick-and-roll situation, which was somehow changed to a sideline foul when LeBron threw one of the biggest tantrums I've ever seen a professional athlete throw. And that's saying something, by the way. And the intimidation that the refs have with LeBron is so insulting that it's actually amusing. You heard me just laughing. I was just laughing thinking about it again. What next? What are we going to see next? Are we going to see him demanding them wipe away baskets that are scored on him? Because that was clearly a foul. There was a bit of contact, but there was no whistle. You got to go off when they review this stuff. Of course, they didn't review it. But when the foul is called or when continuation happens is when the whistle is blown. So there's a bit of contact prior to that, right? And then Ibaka got the ball. Then there was a clear foul which was called after he received the ball and he went straight in for the dunk. It clearly should have been continuation. And if you think that I'm being hateful or spiteful or salty towards LeBron, no. The same. If let's just be honest for a second. If we saw the same thing, I mean, we wouldn't because we rarely see LeBron screen for a ball handler. But just say LeBron was screening for a ball handler, and it was a pick and roll situation, and there was a foul called once he received the ball. What are the chances that they would overturn that? I'd say 0. There's absolutely no chance they would overturn it. It comes down to the intimidation. As I said, it's so insulting to basketball fans, to real basketball fans, that it's actually amusing. What are they going to do next to appease this guy? Anyway, back to the game. And Toronto kept chipping away. They found themselves down by 17 points, but they kept grinding away. And they tied the game with 10 seconds left on a late 3, which was very impressive when you consider that they were down by 17. They're down 2-0 on the road, and they showed a lot of fight. But LeBron knifed them with a drifting floater off the glass. I had to think about how I was going to describe that shot. I haven't seen too many of those. It was an incredible shot, but he got the ball in the backcourt. So here's my question, right? He got the ball in the backcourt. There was 8 or 9 seconds. Even though there was a timeout call, they opted to bring it in from the baseline, or it was towards the baseline. I'm not sure if it was actually from the baseline, but it was towards the baseline. And Toronto had plenty of opportunities, but for whatever reason, they didn't double him. At this point, you have to make someone else make that shot. Make him pass or take the shot with 2 defenders. But this single coverage thing's not working. He's too good in the clutch right now. And people say that I'm a hater towards LeBron. No, I'm giving him the greatest, credit you can possibly give a guy at the end of games. I'm saying that leave a professional open to double him. He's that good. Leave a guy who's, J.R. Smith or Kyle Korver, maybe not those guys, but leave other professionals open because he's so effective in the clutch. And we saw that in Indiana. I said the exact same thing. You've got to get the ball out of his hands, whatever it takes. And there's only a few players in NBA history that you could legitimately say this for. Jordan's one, Kobe's another, Larry Bird is another, Reggie Miller, to a point. I mean, Reggie Miller was very effective in catch and shoot situations in the clutch, but he wasn't the universal threat on offense that you see out of LeBron or Jordan or Bird that could put the ball on the floor. They could obviously face up. They could catch and shoot. They could also pass as well. It makes it a nightmare. So I see why Toronto hesitated, but at the same time, we've seen this too many times. You just got to get the ball out of his hands. Now, obviously, this series is over, and probably the Raptors' window to get to the finals is also completely over. But I will give them credit for at least making this game interesting. I was expecting this a 20-plus point margin, but they responded very well, and they didn't give up. So I'll give them credit. But the other thing that we should look at as well is the fact that DeRozan wasn't on the floor, I think, at all in the fourth quarter. I can't remember him being on the fourth quarter. He definitely wasn't in there when they made their push late. So when I said that, expect there to be big changes in Toronto, all of a sudden is DeRozan expendable. And I guess if they're going to rebuild, they're going to have to do a fire sale on everybody. That includes Kyle Lowry, DeRozan, Ibaka, whoever. It's going to get messy there. But they've reached the point where I don't think they have a whole lot of other options other than to rebuild, because the East is going to get better, and this is their one opportunity to really get to the finals, and to get swept. It's one thing to get swept, but it's another thing to get swept when you have home court advantage. And this has happened a couple of times during the Lowry and DeRozan era. Now, once again, because there was only 2 games, we're finished up with less than 15 minutes, so high five once again. So we got some time for some more questions. And there was one question that's really emerged, at least in my mailbox, over the last 24 hours, and that's the notion of should the Celtics trade Kyrie Irving for Kawhi Leonard because of the emergence of Terry Rozier. And it's an interesting proposition, don't get me wrong. I mean, you've got to look at it from a standpoint. You've got Rozier, you've also got Kyrie Irving. If you trade Kyrie Irving, are you going to be missing out on a lot? And the answer is absolutely yes. There are certain things that Kyrie Irving does that are very rare. The ability to take over games, playoff games, in the fourth quarter is such a rare skill. Very, very few players have it, and he's got it at a very young age. Kawhi Leonard is a completely different skill set, and that's what makes this question so good. Because if you bring in Kawhi Leonard, he shores up your defense, he does everything, he doesn't require the ball in his hands much, he can score, we've seen that. He does a little bit of everything. We haven't seen him in a playmaker role because when he was an MVP candidate in 2017, who was he meant to pass the ball to? LaMarcus Aldridge was struggling. Danny Green hasn't been himself since the 2013 finals. He didn't have a whole lot of options to create for other players. He had to score. He had to be an aggressive scorer in order for the Spurs to be, essentially contenders. So it'd be interesting to see how he would fit into the Boston scheme of things, because Boston does make players, essentially playmakers, not just scorers. They become playmakers. Man, think Isaiah Thomas, for example. Now, should Boston do this? No, they shouldn't do this, because you can play Rozier and Kyrie Irving in the same backcourt. I really believe that, because you have bench players that can come on and defend for you. And when you think about it, on the other side of the ball, yeah, okay, maybe they're not the greatest defensive backcourt, but on offense, they're going to give any backcourt in the league fits trying to guard these guys, because they both have very similar skill sets in terms of their completeness on the offensive end. And Rozier's a bit of a streak shooter, and he's hot now, but we don't know. Like, even that's a bad thing to say, because we've only seen him for 1 year, and he was backing up Kyrie Irving. If he's starting, maybe he's a much more consistent shooter than we give him credit for, or scorer at least. I wouldn't trade him. I wouldn't trade either of these guys. I think they've got gems with both of them, and I wouldn't hurt me to see them sticking with a core of Rozier, Irving, and it's great insurance too for Irving's health in case, there's bigger problems with his knee. But if you go with Rozier, Irving, Tatum, and Brown, and okay, as I said before, they're undersized, but the way that Boston's defense works is all on rotations. I mean, they're undersized now. I mean, you're playing Marcus Smart at the 2 guard, or in the backcourt along with Rozier. So you don't really, if Kyrie Irving comes in, he's definitely not the defender that Marcus Smart is, but in terms of size, there's not much of a drop-off there. So I wouldn't make that trade if I was Boston. I'd think long and hard about it, but I think you're giving up a little bit too much for maybe some damaged goods as well, because Kawhi Leonard, I'm not sure, maybe this trade would have made a lot more sense last year, a little bit more fair, but considering the fact that he didn't play pretty much at all this past season, and you're giving up a player like Kyrie Irving for him, I'm not sure if that's a really wise trade. Instead of that's a very fair trade, whereas you can kind of expect San Antonio to get pennies on the dollar for Leonard right now because of the situation there. And that's typically what happens when you trade a superstar. It's very rare that you see a superstar for superstar deal. So I would prefer them to keep what they have intact and just let them develop, let them play together. And then if we see Kyrie Irving and Rozier unable to play alongside each other, then you make that trade. Or you make a similar trade. But I don't think you make that trade without at least testing and seeing how good it can be when they're playing together. Next question is asking, what are LeBron's best options this offseason? Now, this is a good question because I don't think Philadelphia is his best option. People are saying, he should go to the Sixers, another super team, blah, blah, blah. I mean, he might do that, but I hope it doesn't go that way, because I would like to see Philadelphia develop without him. And let's be honest, when you put a LeBron James, because there's only one of them, when you put LeBron on a team, everyone has to fit into his game. You have to play the LeBron James offense. And there are certain players that are built for that, but not Embiid and not Simmons. They're not built to play alongside LeBron. LeBron is built to play alongside JJ Redick and Saric or Ilyasova. He would not go well there, and they would have to pretty much blow up that entire team to bring in the Kevin Loves or whoever to play alongside him. And that would be an absolute disaster. So I think you can cross them off. I think Cleveland remains a pretty good option. And he seems like he's trying to endear himself back. Now, this guy does play politics pretty well, so he might be building up to leaving them on a good note, right? Rather than, a lot of drama, a lot of tension. But it does look like he's enjoying himself. And if he's enjoying himself, then why leave? Because where's he going to go to? LA? He's going to go into a much tougher conference with a worse team. He may never make the playoffs out there. Unless if there's a guarantee that Paul George is going there as well, then okay, you can pretty much guarantee a playoff spot. Then if you've got Paul George and LeBron alongside Ingram and Julius Randle. But once again, there's no guarantee that these guys would actually fit in alongside LeBron. You don't have LeBron James players there pretty much. It's kind of like, for lack of a better term, it's kind of like bring in Colin Kaepernick. And I'm not saying the drama associated with it. I'm talking strictly if you have a running quarterback who there's not a whole lot left in the NFL anyway. There was an era where they were quite popular, whether you had Michael Vick or Vince Young or players like that, Steve McNair, they could roam out and get out of the pocket a little bit. You don't really see that a whole lot now. Defenses have gotten much better. But regardless, if you have a roaming quarterback, an agile quarterback that you like to roll out, he's not going to be able to play in a traditional pocket quarterback role. And that's why a lot of teams, of course, a lot of it has to do with the drama associated with Kaepernick, but that's a big reason why Kaepernick wasn't brought in as a backup, because the system now is pocket passing. And if your starter gets hurt, you can't just simply throw the playbook up in the air, because it's so much more complicated. And if you've got a guy that can't really do that, then that's wasted. So the point that I'm trying to make is, if a team brings in LeBron, you have to restructure everything. Now, is it worth it? Yeah, some situations. But if you're Philadelphia, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it if it's Boston or these emerging teams. But what about Miami? Miami doesn't really have a whole lot of consistent offensive talent. They're a tough team, very well coached. But it would make sense to blow up the team to bring him in, because the benefits far outweigh the negatives in that situation. San Antonio is another interesting option, but I don't think there's any chance in hell that he actually plays for a dominant coach such as Greg Popovich. I'm trying to think of other options there for him. There's not a whole lot, to be honest with you. I guess New York is always an option, but once again, that team's not very good. There is a connection with him and Fizdale, though. Fizdale was an assistant coach in Miami when he won a couple of championships. It would be interesting to see how we would play alongside Porzingis. But beyond that team doesn't have a whole lot of consistent offensive talent, or defensive talent either, for that matter. So who else is left? Maybe the Clippers. I mean, it's a possibility, but you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. And is it a better opportunity for him than Cleveland? And I would have to say no. So right now, I think his best option would be to stay in Cleveland. Whether he does that or not, it's anyone's guess. But if I was close to him, I'd say this is probably your best opportunity to solidify your legacy as a Cav, not just someone that bounces from team to team. And it also gives you the best opportunity to continue to be productive as well as being competitive. I don't think there's any other team that can offer you all three of those. Let's move on to another question. And okay, here's a good one. I'm not sure if it's a good one, but it's one it's popping up more and more. Was Kobe ever the best player in the NBA? Absolutely he was. And I don't know where this started, but there was a period from 2006 up to about 2009, 2010, where he was the best player in basketball. No question about it. Maybe you could throw in Dwayne Wade's name in that. Maybe LeBron's for maybe one of those seasons. But 2006, when he was averaging 35 and dragging a team where his supporting cast was Lamar Odom and Smoosh Parker and Chris Mim and Kwame Brown. I'm not just making that up. I'm not exaggerating. That was before they got Pau Gasol. That was his supporting cast. They still won 45 games. Unbelievable. The next year, he ran off 4 games where he scored 50 points or more, and there was 2 60-point games in there, and that got him back into the playoff hunt. Yes, I'm aware that they were bounced in the first round, but that's in the Western Conference. I'll give you a pass, because I think in 2006, if you put that team, or 2007, sorry, everyone rants and raves about LeBron getting to the finals in 2007. If you put that Lakers team in the Eastern Conference, they would have made the finals as well. So no question. And then 2008, obviously he lost in the NBA finals, but then he won back-to-back titles. And you think back to some of those moments where he was just tearing up the Orlando Magic, or he was tearing up the Phoenix Suns with Grant Hill, who evolved into a pretty good one-on-one defender, especially on the perimeter, and he was hitting fadeaway after fadeaway after fadeaway in Game 6, the closeout game for them. So I've got no question in my mind that he was the best player in basketball for a 3 or 4 year period. And the fact that this question is coming up now, I don't know where that's come from. But whoever came up with it does not know basketball. And I think they're probably, because the next guy to come and take the mantle of the best player in the world was LeBron. Are they trying to extend LeBron's legacy here by saying it wasn't 2011 or whenever that LeBron emerged as the best player in basketball? It was actually 2006. That's a load of nonsense. 2006 was the first year LeBron actually made the playoffs. There's no way he was the best player in the world at that point. If that's the agenda that's trying to be pushed here, because this is such a ridiculous question that, as I said, I've been getting more and more lately. But it's such a ridiculous question. You got to question the motives behind it. Next question is all this LeBron talk irrelevant? They're not winning the title. Well, we don't know that. They could well win the title if they finish off the sweep, which I anticipate to do, and then if Boston finishes off Philly, I would pick Cleveland to win against Boston. It'll be a long series. I hope it's a long series. It'll be a competitive series. And then if they make the finals, would it shock us if they were to beat Houston? A little bit, but I've seen crazier things happen. I mean, anything can happen in a 7-game series, and I think all you have to do is look back to the 2016 finals for proof of that. So, but getting back to the actual question, what was it? I've gone away from it. Here it is. Is all this LeBron talk irrelevant? No, it's been great. He's played really well on the offensive end. So even if he doesn't win the title, I'm willing to, not just give him a pass, but give him major points and probably put him up the top 10 if they're able to get back to the finals with this team and the way that he's playing. Now, he's got to continue to play the way that he's playing, but he's played fantastic. So, no, it's not irrelevant at all. And we'll finish it up with, here we are. Greatest player to never win a ring. And there's quite a lot of them that are eligible for this, from Allen Iverson to John Stockton to Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone. I'm going to go with Karl Malone, obviously. Charles Barkley's another one too. Notice there's a lot from the Jordan era, because Jordan denied a lot of people from getting championships. But I will go with Karl Malone. Karl Malone was such an offensive force, and he was a great defensive rebounder, and he wasn't overly athletic. And what I mean that is, when he was at his peak, he wasn't overly athletic. He was obviously huge. He got massive, and he was just an absolute brute in the post. But when he got bigger, his athleticism wasn't the same. He wasn't, it's not like LeBron, who got bigger and is still taking off from the foul line. But in terms of what he could do on the court, you put him in pick and roll situations, and he was lethal because he could pick and pop. You can isolate him, and he could face up, or you could finish with sweeping hooks going across the lane with his right hand. He was a very underrated passer. He was one of maybe two other players, or three other players, Ben Wallace and Dennis Rodman, that could guard Shaq in isolations and not allow Shaq to just bulldoze his way to the rim. People talk about what Dennis Rodman did to Shaq and what Ben Wallace did. They forget what Karl Malone did to Shaq in back-to-back playoff series in 97 and 98. And you could argue that was an even better performance on the defensive end than what we saw from Ben Wallace or Shaq, because you saw the Lakers get swept in one series, in the 98 series, and it would have been a sweep had Karl Malone not missed, I think it was like 19 out of 20 shots, something insane, in Game 3 against the Lakers at the Forum. So the point that I'm making is he was very complete, great rebounder as well. And just think about how differently we would be talking about his career had the Jazz won a title. Think about this. Here's some food for thought for you. 1998, right? They beat the Rockets, who had Akeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler was his final year, and Charles Barkley. There's 3 Hall of Famers for you right there. The second round, they went through David Robinson and Tim Duncan. There's another 2 Hall of Famers. Then they went through Shaq and a young Kobe, but those are 2 Hall of Famers as well. So how many is that? 3, 2, 2, 7. Then they went through, and then they had to face but they had to face the 98 Bulls, who had Rodman, Pippen, Jordan, another 3 Hall of Famers. They had to face 10 Hall of Famers, and they came up just short. It took maybe the biggest, well, in my opinion, the biggest shot in NBA history to prevent them from winning a title. That's how good the 1998 Utah Jazz were. And had they won a title that year, how differently do we talk about Karl Malone? Now, the question is, who's the best that's never won? It's got to be him. There's no question in my mind that's him. Now, you can throw out other names if you want, but even guys like Charles Barkley, they were not as complete of an offensive player or on the defensive end either than what Karl Malone was. Now, you can say, yeah, he choked a little bit, especially in 97 when he missed those foul shots. But just think back to the performance he delivered, for lack of a better term. Mailman, right? Mailman delivering. But think of the performance he delivered. They were down 3-1. This is when it was 2-3-2 in the finals. So Game 5 was in Chicago. Down 3-1. Karl Malone scored 39 points. And I think the final score was like 81-79. So he scored nearly double his team's points in that environment, in that pressure situation, with pretty much everything on the line. And he was struggling leading through. So for him to have that breakout game, he was clutch. Maybe not clutch at the foul line, but he was very clutch in that situation. And then he followed that up in Game 6. Everyone talks about him getting the ball stolen from Jordan. He had 31 points in that game. He had 70 points in those final 2 games. And he was dueling with Jordan, and quite honestly, it looked like he was getting the upper hand until that final minute of Game 6. He was a great player, man, and I've got no questions that he's the greatest player to never win a championship. And we're going to call it a wrap there. Tomorrow we got 2 games. We got the Warriors and Pelicans. I've got the Pelicans winning and tying the series. And I've got the Jazz bouncing back and tying the series, but I think it'll be a lot closer. I think we'll get a close game either way. I don't think we'll see the Rockets blow them out. I don't think that we'll see the Jazz blow them out. But I think the Jazz will, they've got a lot of fight in them. We saw them get killed in Game 1. They bounced back and won. Now we saw them get killed in Game 3. Do they bounce back and win? It's a flip of the coin. I'm going to go with the Jazz, though, and I hope we get a longer series, because if the Jazz lose this game, it'll be done in 5. But yeah, so I'll go with the home team for both games, and I hope you enjoy the games, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.